Thank you. All right, well, I want to start by saying two things. Firstly, I don't normally public speak. My podcast is called Behind the Shield for a reason, because that's where I'm cowering. But this is such an important topic that when I was asked to come and present today, it overpowered the fact of my imposter syndrome and terror of public speaking. So this is such a beautiful opportunity to finally turn the ship around. Like I've said to people recently, we are really at a crisis, and we'll get into that in a minute, but we have two opportunities. You can be either the person who steered the ship around, or you can be the person at the helm when it sank. So the one good thing about being in the squeeze that we're in now is it's now really adding momentum to make changes. So I think there's a very positive takeaway from this, but we will obviously underline, what the things that are wrong that we're seeing at the moment, so then we can address the solutions. So, very first question, who the hell is this English bloke that's talking? I'm one of those, just a normal firefighter. I was never at 9/11 or the Boston bombing or the Vegas shooting. I'm not the rope guru or the EKG god. I'm just everyone else, the person that just put their gear on the rig and tried to do the best and went to the trainings and kept myself in shape. The backstory of my journey, like I said, I'm from England. Very long story, very short. You have the annual physical at senior school, and they told me I was colorblind. Did the book, can't see some of the numbers. Now, all right, James, you can never be a pilot, you can never be a firefighter, you can never be all the cool stuff. You can be a badger tamer and a paperclip folder, that's about it. So I fumbled around for a long time. I ended up moving to the States after meeting an American girl doing stunts in Japan. And at 26 years old, had this epiphany, I can see color. It took me that long, which is why I'm not a police officer. But it took me into the academy, and I ended up I trained as a firefighter in Orlando. Hialeah was my first department. The kind of underlying element of this whole conversation is family is always the most important thing. So my wife at the time was an entertainer. I met her while I was in Japan, as I pointed out earlier, not an adult entertainer, a regular entertainer. So she was pursuing singing, dancing, etc. So once she wanted to go to Miami, went to Hialeah, then she wanted to go to Hollywood. So then I'm getting a job now in California. So Hialeah, the bar was set incredibly high. Then I go to California, another extremely high bar. I'm a tillman on a truck company there. And then we have a little boy, so she wants to move back to the East Coast to be by her family. So I move back, go to Orange County. We get divorced. When I was at the station, there was a stunt double in my bed, so that marriage didn't work out very well. So now I'm a single father, and I moved to Reedy Creek because it's, again, what we're going to talk about, better working conditions. I could actually be home when I was supposed to be home. Telling a single parent they can't go home at 7 in the morning doesn't go down well. So the point of me telling you this story is it gave me a very gypsy-like, 10,000-foot view of the fire service. East Coast and West Coast, arguably one of the best and one of the worst departments. I'm not going to say which. So a very kind of broad perspective. So now I'm at Orange County, about 10 years into my career, and I start going to funerals. And 6 of my friends in 2 years. Overdose, heart attack while he was swimming, aggressive cancer on a 23-year-old firefighter that basically choked him to death. And so you start seeing now the ill health that's in the fire service. So coming from a background as an athlete and a coach and an exercise physiology major, I knew that the answers were out there. I wasn't the expert, but this is when podcasts were starting to come around. And I'd been listening to Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss and some other ones. And there's a podcast called Barbell Shrugged, who ironically, one of the hosts from that died of cancer. Actually a heart attack, excuse me. But he had a Navy SEAL on called Kirk Parsley. And Kirk was telling a story of, he was a SEAL pre-9/11. He went to med school because it was not a lot going on then. Came back to the West Coast teams as their physician. He started this journey, and he's watching or looking at all the blood work of his uber athlete soldiers or sailors in that particular example, and the blood work is looking like an 80-year-old woman. And he's like, "What is going on here? These are some of the most elite tactical athletes on the planet." As he's talking to these men, as time goes on, he starts learning they're all on Ambien. And so he looks at it and starts diving into the world of sleep medicine and realizes that a lot of their training is done at night, and the way they've got everything kind of laid out, they're sleep deprived. And so they're relying on Ambien, and for anyone that's kind of done the research on that, Ambien, Benadryl, all those, you don't actually sleep. They did a study on people who were addicted to Benadryl, basically, and they died the exact same. They had the shortened lifespan that people who work shifts and are sleep deprived in other ways were. So sleep medicine does not make you sleep. You don't get into a deep restorative sleep. So he got his command to actually change the way they work their SEALs, and he also developed a formula of just supplements to get them off the Ambien, and within a few months all their blood work was where it should have been as an uber athlete. So I'm listening to this driving, having buried lots of my friends, and I'm asking the question, well, why are we not talking about this in the fire service? This is probably 9-ish years ago now. And so I said, well, I need to listen to a podcast that talks about firefighter health so I can learn more about this. Well, as they say, if you're looking for something that isn't there, that's your sign to do it yourself. So 8.5 years ago, I started the Behind the Shield podcast, and it's not me yabbering on like I'm doing today. It's all interviewing the best experts of all these fields. And I've got firefighters and cops and soldiers, but I've also got, the military sleep medicine experts, people in the sporting world, and then, back injuries and all the things, mental health. And so I'm accumulating this, and then I get to 5 years into my last department, and I'm at a crossroads where I'm trying to make a difference in that particular organization, and you can just see it's not going to change anything. And the chain of command has got like 4 links to it, that's it. So I made the leap of faith to do this all in. So I cashed out my pension. I have no pension, no health care. And I just went, and then with my loving wife who agreed on it, to do this full time so I could speak for us outside, because every single one of us that wears a uniform, there's an element of being somewhat handcuffed and not be able to say things. Now, I'm not talking about talking shit, excuse my language, but I'm talking about productive issues and solutions that we bring to it. So for the last 6 years now, that's what I've been doing. So that's kind of the backstory of who I am. And then I've been talking about 24/72 for about 8.5 years now, having understood that Boca, this kind of unicorn with rainbows department, was out there. And then you realize, okay, well, the work week, this is a big issue. And then you dive in and you realize, as I will discuss, all the issues that are attached to sleep deprivation are literally all the issues that we see. Doesn't mean it's the only factor, but it's a big, as I say, it's not the elephant in the room, it's the herd of elephants. So let's get to the actual presentation. All right, so how bad is it? When I came on 20 years ago, I was telling the guys this morning, guys and girls, all I had to go on what was it like to be a firefighter was Ask Jeeves, and you type in what's it like, and it was like sooty faces, saving babies and mustaches, and heroism. That was it. Now when you do the same thing, obviously they have access to all the information. So when you compare recruitment back then, I give an example. When I tested for Anaheim in California, the conference room that we tested in for 30 spots, 30, this is at the written test, they've already filtered people out, was 1,000 certified firefighter, EMTs or paramedics that had been wildland firefighters, ambulance operators, been through Explorer programs. So they had a resume, 1,000 of them, and we took 30. And I was blessed to have one. I think it was an affirmative action. They took the Englishman. But joking apart, the bar was extremely high, and you had to vie for that position. So when we look at recruitment now, this is a very glaring issue. Not only are we struggling to recruit, and our biggest cheerleaders in the fire service were the firefighters, and now we're having our own profession telling our children, I don't want you to be a firefighter. So things have changed immensely, and some departments are able to hire, but I ask you, what kind of recruit are you getting now versus what you used to get? If you have, let's say, 1,000 people and you've got to hire 100, that's 10% of the list. Now you've only had 200 apply, now that's 50% of the list. From a risk management point of view, what is the liability of the bottom section of that list 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now? So, we've got that. Then obviously we've got, as we all know, the mental health issues, the suicides, the overdoses, the heart attacks, the cancers, the autoimmune disease. And then let's go even further. We have a much higher incidence of pediatric illnesses through our children, reproductive problems, all of those as well. So we know health-wise and know acuity-wise, performance-wise that this has declined. And again, the beautiful thing is we can turn that around. But I think, we all are pretty, if we're being honest with ourselves, we're acknowledging we are at kind of a crisis now because we're watching this line, but it hasn't tapered off. Like that line is still facing this way. And there is a potential, if we don't change the profession, where some cities or counties might not even have fire, police, EMS, depending on, if young people want to test or not. So, but we're going to get into solutions, which is what makes this very exciting. All right, so whose fault is it? Any answers? Is it the firefighter? I never rose above rank of firefighter, so is it me? Is it the chief? Is it the city or county administration? All of us. And this is why it hasn't been fixed. Because, that blame storming thing, each one of us has believed a version of a myth. So I watched Ladder 49, become a firefighter, join the city of Hialeah. We were talking earlier. When I joined the city of Hialeah, I didn't even know what my salary was. They told us like 3 weeks into it. That was the environment. Blindly going in on heroism and saving babies, like I said. So I am part of the people on the ground who then go home and tell my neighbor that I've got this amazing schedule and I only work 10 days a month and it's incredible and we sleep at the station. And we all know that's wrong. And we'll do some math in a minute that will illustrate that, but that's not actually the environment that we work in. It's very, very unhealthy, the environment. So then let's go up to kind of, the chief officer level position. Now we're looking at, the way the department's going. Are we having honest conversations about what's going on? And are we telling, the administrators the same thing? And then at the administrator level, are we telling the public that we struggle to recruit and maybe the bar is coming down, the delivery of service maybe is diminishing? And maybe, should we be giving a tax refund because there's only X amount of people going to show up now? And I'm being facetious, but this is why it's all of us. And then the public. What are we buying you when you're at the store? What are we buying you for lunch? Why is there an engine on my medical call? It's 2025. The first medics were African American in Pittsburgh back in the 60s. 60 years ago. And we're still asking, why is there an engine on my EMS scene? You know what I mean? Our generation, all we've ever known is fire and EMS combined. So we've done a horrible job as a profession of educating the public. The public have done a horrible job of trying to find out what we actually do. So there's all these kind of fairy tales and myths floating around, which is why there's so much resistance to this conversation. Until we tap into what's actually happening at every level, we're not going to get to the root cause. So the answer is every single one of us. Okay, there's two things that firefighters hate. Exactly, change and the way we've always done it. So, the way we've always done it, does anyone know who these young men and women are? These are factory workers and chimney sweeps. As young as 4 years old in the Victorian times. That's the way they used to do it. There's a thing that came out called, I think it was chimney cancer or soot cancer, where I think in 1 year 30,000 children died in the Industrial Revolution. I think this was in the UK. So the way we've always done it doesn't mean it's the right way. Was that cheap labor for the people that owned the factories then? Yes, and we know of examples of other cheap labor that weren't ethical either in our history. So just because we've done it that way doesn't mean it's right. Another example. Has anyone ever heard of Sir William Halsted? Has anyone got family or friends that are surgeons, physicians? So if you know about the medical residency program, you'll hear about the crazy hours that our residents do. Again, who have lives in their hands and have to make, momentary decisions. William was the first person that was a surgical, he had residents under him, and he would work for days at a time. And so that became a kind of blueprint. I mean, we're talking, I think, 100 years ago, and it still stayed like you should be doing these 80-hour work weeks as a resident. Well, behind the scenes, Mr. Halsted was a cocaine addict and an opioid addict. So he was running on, basically nose candy and, scalpels. So, of course, if you are on amphetamines or something like that, then you're going to be able to work for X amount of time. Doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. So just kind of debunking this is how we used to do it, that doesn't mean it's the right way. And and I'll get on this later, if this was the right way, then I wouldn't have a podcast and we wouldn't be having this conversation, because you'd all be healthy and happy, not lose anyone in your department, and your families would all be intact. So it is a great opportunity to question the way we've always done it. All right, shift myths. So let's go back to what we tell people. I work 1 day on, 2 days off. Okay, does anyone know what a civilian works? How many hours a week? 40. So how many hours is that a day? 8. So an actual work day is 8 hours. So 24 is 3 squished together, of which the third of those 8 is from midnight to 8 a.m. So actually what we work is 3 days on, 1 day off. So when you do the math and you kind of expand that out, law enforcement nurses, baristas, administrators, on paper, 40 hours a week. So if you divide that by 8 and times it by the number of weeks in a year, you get 280 days a year worked. If you work a 56-hour work week, any guesses on how many days a year? So you get a day off. You won't get Christmas unless you're the crusty old guy, but you get 1 day off. So this is, again, debunking our own myths. I'm completely guilty of this. I have this amazing shift. I sleep at the station. You dive into sleep medicine. You don't sleep at the station. Your eyes are closed for a while, but you're not getting any deep restorative sleep while you're waiting to be woken up for a possible PD code. So we actually work 364 civilian days a year. So all we are trying to do in this conversation today is get back to where almost everyone else that saves lives or makes coffee works on a weekly basis. Okay, so has anyone heard about this incredible solution to this problem called the 4896? All right, buckle up. So there's a gentleman, Joel Billings. He was a volunteer firefighter who actually never worked in the station overnight, even volunteering. So he'd just done daytime stuff. Decides that he's going to go into the research world instead of the fire service. Admirable. And he does a study on a department that made a switch from the 2448 to the 4896. They do the research. I think they took cortisol samples and some other things. And when it came away, they were like, oh, the 4896 is slightly better. Now, I don't know how this happened, but the fire service ran with that. They're like, oh, this is a better shift. Now, as we will get into with sleep medicine, 24 hours with no or disrupted sleep is dangerous. 48 hours is pure insanity. So how did this find that it was better? Well, if you actually dive into the study, the department that Joel studied ran 1 call a shift, less than 1 at night. So on average, 0 at night. So when you sleep for 48 hours, that second day when you would have woken up at 5 a.m. to drive to the station, you didn't. So you're actually a little bit more rested than the person who came to the station. And we'll talk about a solution for that later too. So I've never worked for a fire department that runs 1 a shift in 14 years, and I work for 4 of them, multiple stations. unless that actually applies to yours, which is I think 0.01% of departments in the country that are career at least, then it's a horrible, horrible idea. The other thing is, as the quote says, a 4896 is a 56-hour work week. So what they're saying is we're going to fix the 56-hour work week by changing it to a 56-hour work week. So we're not fixing anything. I always tell people, imagine a Rubik's Cube. I'm spinning the cube and everything's red. And now I spin it again. Now everything's blue. That's pretty. But no one's saying, why is the cube so big? So we move these days around, but we don't talk about the actual number of hours worked. So this is the issue that we're going through at the moment. So if you really want to get me triggered, like a 16-year-old high school person, ask me for the data. Because there's a few reasons why it's angering. Firstly, to do a study that 42 hours a work week is healthier than 56 is asking for a study that if you stand in front of a bus, will it hurt when it hits you? There's a certain point in research where it's common sense. So we don't need studies to show that this is going to be a much healthier work week in all the areas. Now, there are studies outside the fire service. The other question is, why isn't there data? Very, very good point. When a really unintelligent English immigrant can find this information through a podcast, we as a profession should have been talking about shift work and sleep deprivation and doing research for about 20 years now. So that's the other question, is why don't we have data when we should have data? So, but what I would say, if you want data outside of the military and so many other professions that have done a lot of research on their people, when you look at the shipping industry and the airline industry and the trucking industry, flip it around. We have an incredible longitudinal study that's nationwide, on if we do it this way, this is how you break firefighters. So the equal and opposite is true. We know that if we work 56 hours a week, that there will be this impact on physical, mental health, relationships, addiction, and then, now people are learning that it's not such a great job, and now we've got a recruitment issue, and here we are. So we know how not to do it, and I'm not saying that everything we do is wrong, of course, but there are definitely now some rooms to go, okay, which parts of these are detrimental and how do we fix those? So we do have data, but sadly our data are in the graveyards. Like I said, the beginning of my podcast was 6 funerals. And just to underline the kind of magnitude, there's a great competition every year called the 343 Hero Challenge. It's done in Orange County, started by some friends of mine, and it memorializes the 343 firefighters we lost on 9/11, and it's a fundraiser as well. It's like a workout competition. The first year I did it, I had those 6 names on my back. And that was 10 years ago. I just did it September this year, and I think I had 113 names on my back. So that's my data. That's the metric that I care about. All right, so as we progress on data, let's talk about what's out there. So the U.S. Fire Administration states that in 2024, we lost 73 firefighters. I know 73 firefighters that we lost this last year, just from Facebook, in California where I worked and Florida where I worked. I'm pretty sure there's more than 2 states in this country. So firstly, we're woefully underreported. What is, justifies being on a list? We all know that a lot of our suicides are underreported. A lot of our overdoses especially are super stigmatized still, so they don't count. But there's a massive demographic that isn't factored in this at all. Does anyone know which that is? Retirees. So how old is your average patient? Are they 20, 30, or are they getting into 60s, 70s? So the door closes on the last day and our retiree walks out, the back apron, they cease to be a statistic. The VA at least attempts to count, to track our veterans, but we have no VA in the fire service or in law enforcement. So if you think about it, that's probably not even that. When you get the real figure, is probably 10% of who we actually lose far too soon. But our retirees aren't counted, and it's so sad because we lose touch from so many of them too. We don't have a VA in the fire service. So when people go and look at data and they research, well, how many firefighters actually died, and they see that number, they're like, well, that's not bad. There's 1 million of them. But that's not that number. And so I think we need to really kind of dive into that and make sure that we understand the true magnitude of the issue, because just scroll Facebook, ask a firefighter to scroll Facebook and you'll see, Maltese crosses with a black band over and over and over again. So, we are at a health crisis, there's no question. All right, so let's talk about the acute effects of sleep deprivation. That's on our actual performance. So if you hear, it's great to hear this conversation happening now. If I don't sleep for 24 hours, I have the cognitive ability of a blood alcohol of 0.1. That in itself is jarring, that you're going to have someone, driving, pushing meds with that. What makes it far more startling, though, in my opinion, is the people in those studies were probably students. They were paid $50 to do a sleep study by one of their researchers. That's one night without sleep. Now you add that 10, 20, 30 years into a career every third day, especially, God forbid, you're on a mandatory overtime or you've gone to a 48-96 and now you're doing 2 in a row, 0.1 isn't even close. So the cognitive ability of a first responder behind the wheel of a truck or pushing meds is completely distorted through sleep deprivation. So something that we obviously need to address. If you take any of your favorite sporting teams and you look in the behind the scenes 30 or 30 whatever, LeBron isn't like, oh yeah, I stay up 3 times a week. I don't sleep, it helps my game. No. I had one guy who works with teams. Every player has their own bedding roll that goes with them to every game. And they sleep on their unique bedding roll because sleep is so important. So when I was talking to, I have a lot of special forces, special operations guests, and you're talking to Delta or whoever, they have, even SEAL teams, PJs, they have strength and conditioning coaches, nutritionists, sports psychologists, and they are forging elite performance. When nutritionists and strength and conditioning coaches work with our population, more often than not, the conversation is how can we get them to die less? And we need to be over here. How can we make sure that James can get up 28 stories with 100 pounds of gear and then go to work without being dead at 50? So it's a massive difference between where we are and where we should be. So that effect on our acuity, let's talk about the long-term effect. Lives, property damage, and lawsuits. How many times do we see on the news that a rescue engine truck has collided with another emergency vehicle, a civilian minivan full of kids, all the time? And one of my friends who does accident investigation was telling me, what's terrifying is in a lot of these types of calls, there's no skid marks. So there's a thing called microsleep where you'll be so tired, you'll be driving and your brain shuts down for a few seconds. And that's why you see these rigs just bury into whatever they hit without any braking, because that person was literally asleep. So let's expand it on a larger scale. Exxon Valdez, oil spill, killed 4 people in the cleanup, and innumerable elements on our environment and the fish and the wildlife. The Challenger shuttle, I think there was sleep deprivation as far as the actual, when they were putting the tiles on, if I'm not mistaken. Chernobyl, the USS John McCain, 10 sailors killed, 48 injured. All directly related to sleep deprivation. And you think about the financial impact of some of these. Even the minivan in the intersection. I mean, what's the lawsuit on that? Not to mention the toll on your citizens. So a more personal one for me, Drew Hughes. I had his father, David, on the show. Drew was 16 years old, riding a skateboard, fell and hit his head. He ends up being taken to the ER, and his parents aren't there. He's acting a little kind of erratic, but he's 16. He's just had this fall, and none of his family are around him. Someone in the hospital decides, well, what we need to do is RSI and intubate this kid. So in the process, the result was, and I think this was the medic who was transporting, when we intubate, for people that aren't in the medical field, we have to give a paralytic to stop everything from moving, including the respiratory drive, and then we give them Versed, which makes them not be conscious of what we're doing. It makes them forget, basically. Well, they gave him the thing where he couldn't move anymore. They forgot to give him Versed, and then they intubated the esophagus. So this 16-year-old boy, when his parents were away from him, watched the roof of the ceiling as he suffocated in the back. Now, I don't know if that specific one was sleep deprivation, because I've just heard it from the father, but I guarantee you a combination of low training standards and sleep deprivation resulted in that child being stolen from his family. So that's a real thing for us. Like the wrecks and the medical malpractice, that's something that could happen to us at any time, which is why, as I illustrate, I love my coffee. And when I go to Starbucks, they make my latte and I use oat milk because I'm a hippie, and it's delicious. But if they mess it up, no one dies. If we get up at 3 in the morning and then descend a 2-story pole, get in the back of a truck, navigate lights and sirens through traffic, get to a scene, spike a ladder, go through a 2nd-story window, do a primary search, find a child, take them out, rescues held up by a train. I guess we're doing EMS now. Doff your gear, start working a pediatric algorithm and drug doses. That's okay for them to work 56, but the guy that makes my coffee works 40. So that acuity thing is a really important part of this conversation. If we're going to ask people to do the things that we do in the fire service, we have to create an environment that forges performance at the highest level. But the way we're doing it at the moment, it's really setting up an environment for mistakes, which human life and financially could be devastating. So that's the acute effects. Let's go to chronic. So I forgot to put it on here, so I've got to say it first, otherwise I'll forget, because my mind's like a colander. The first one that we see most of, I think, if anyone works with workman's comp and sees those kind of claims, is musculoskeletal injuries. Back injuries, knees, shoulders, necks. That's what we suffer from a lot. I've had, again, numerous people, strength coaches, back injury specialists, all kinds of people. Every single person has said that if you are not sleeping, it's not if you'll get hurt, it's when. And if you understand strength and conditioning, I use weights, I break down my tissue, muscle, ligament, tendon, and then when I sleep, it rebuilds. So if every third day I'm not sleeping, now all of a sudden I'm kind of putting bricks up, but I'm not putting the mortar in. And at a certain point, there will be a catastrophic injury. I've got meniscus tears on both knees and a back injury that I rehab with movement. If you've got any issues with your back, foundation training, look it up. It's incredible. But so when you hear people say, oh, it's always the fit guys that get hurt, yeah, because they take their job seriously. And they're doing the training that they should be doing, but they don't have the rest and recovery to actually benefit from it. And there's a dollar cost for that. Musculoskeletal injuries are one of the biggest things that we suffer from in workman's comp. I mean, I've got 3 of them. My heart's fine at the moment, I hope, but my bits keep breaking. So that's musculoskeletal. Cancer. University of Miami does all these studies. It's fantastic. Every time I see a cancer symposium, beautiful. This video where they put particulates on the gear and then he takes it home and now it's on the kids. You're like, wow, we can pass this everywhere. And now we're talking about PFAS, which I had the lawyer who actually kind of blew that up, and then I had the firefighter spouse who blew it up in our profession. I just interviewed 2 guys in Denmark that think they have a probiotic that's going to remove PFAS from our body. So if I'm going to give you some good news, that's it. So, so that's all well and good, but what no one mentions is that sleep deprivation, shift work, by the World Health Organization is classified as a 2A carcinogen. So I'll give you the perfect example. Reedy Creek, not known for their firefighting. I've buried numerous creek firefighters, a lot of them from cancer. So if it was just carcinogen exposure, they'd all be healthy as could be. But it's not. So sleep deprivation is a massive amplifier of cancer. Because if you think about it, and this is the same with COVID, we put our most sleep-deprived people on the front line during COVID while everyone else hid in their house. You're a vulnerable population if your immune system is being compromised through sleep deprivation. And that's what cancer is. It's inflammation, basically, uncontrollable inflammation. Now let's go to mental health. I got a couple of guests I've had on a few times, Brooke Bartlett and Jenna Cassis, both, clinical psychologists, I believe. There's always different layers, but they're the top rank that you can be, and they've always worked with our population, police and fire. There is no question about the correlation between sleep deprivation, suicide, addiction, depression, anxiety, everything. And just to kind of frame it into layman's terms, if you go Special Forces selection, what do? Sleep deprive you, to make it hard, to make you want to quit. If you're in interrogation, sleep deprivation. Torture, sleep deprivation. Fire service, normal work week. So, understanding the impact on this, and I'm sure a lot of you in here have been affected by suicide. Where I live in Marion, we lost 4 people wearing the uniform. There was a 5th one who survived their attempt, who gave himself that very paralytic that we just talked about in front of an ER and then dropped and they saved his life. And then a 6th one that was previously at the department left and then he took his own life. So that's in my department, not to mention all the other brothers and sisters that I've lost through, all these other departments too. So again, if we can mitigate some of these causations, and there's other areas, one thing that's not talked about mental health, and I think this is an important thing to talk about too, there's a thing called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experience Score. And on average, it's from 1 to 10, or 0 to 10. On average, prisoners, military members, and first responders have an ACEs of 6. So a lot of us are bringing stuff in. Now, that can be an absolute asset. I'm not talking about screening and getting rid of them. When you work through trauma or whatever it is, that becomes an absolute, superpower in uniform, I believe. But if it's left unaddressed and pushed down, it can become a fracture in your foundation. So understanding that at the front door we bring things in, and having the ability to have these mental health tools at the front rather than a psych test and a polygraph, which are smoke and mirrors, and understand that we're going to be bringing things in and help us start offloading things from the beginning, that's another actionable tool that we can do. But if we know sleep deprivation is an absolute direct correlation between suicide and addiction, and let's include alcoholism there because that's an addiction, that's a big problem in our profession, and we know it is. Testosterone. I won't ask for a show of hands, but I'm a mind reader, and I can tell that most men in this room that work shifts, their testosterone is not where it should be naturally. I'll give you the backstory of this. There's a scale, the doctor's scale, I think it's 250 to 950, and 38-year-old James would go into the doctor and they'd take my blood, if they even asked you to do that, and they're like, oh, James, your testosterone is 260, you're fine, within normal limits. Well, that scale was developed in one of the towns around one of the Ivy League schools, and the 950 was the high school football player, wrestler, whoever, dripping with everything. And then the 250 was the old dude that was almost dead. So it's a scale, an age-based performance scale. So a 30-whatever-year-old first responder shouldn't be next to the dead dude on that scale. But sleep deprivation destroys hormones. And when I was talking about Kurt Parsley, a Navy SEAL, that's what he was seeing. These Navy SEALs had testosterone that was in the toilet. When they changed their schedule, their blood work went back to normal. So the good news is, if you change the sleep and the rest and get rid of the mandatory overtime, the unneeded overtime, naturally a lot of our first responders' hormones will return to normal. Now there's a thing called peptides, which can help you just boost it a little bit. And then we've got TRT. The problem that I'm seeing is now we've got almost like a predatory element where these men's clinics are dropping everywhere. And now you go in and they're like, oh, your T's 700, but you could be at 1200. Let's get you up there, bro. And you'll be able to bench 400. But that's not healthy because they don't tell you that you're going to be on it forever. These things are going to disappear, and then you're going to grow boobs and lose your hair. So there's a responsibility element of where you are, what can we do holistically, and then do we need medical intervention after that? But we can absolutely turn this around, starting with the rest and recovery. Weight gain. I'm going to pick on cops, so, because I know there's none in the room, but we all know the stereotypical coffee and donut, out-of-shape cop. Well, to be fair, a lot of our environments set us up for failure. Your leptin and your ghrelin, which tells you either you're hungry or you're full, is disrupted. If you one night without sleep, you're basically diabetic when you wake up because your insulin hasn't regulated properly. So this is an environment that will promote weight gain, and as we know, then you've got strokes, you've got cardiovascular disease, you've got all these other things. So the more rest and recovery you give, the healthier department will stay, especially if you then use this healthy environment and put fitness standards and maintain that from the front door. Now you're adding longevity as well. So that's the chronic effects. Okay, so now getting to the questions. So this is the one that most people are going to ask. Well, how do we afford it? We can't even afford, what we've got now. How are we going to add another shift? Desmond Tutu has a saying, we spend so much time pulling bodies from the river, we never go upstream and ask why are they falling in the first place. So what we have done, and this is the nature of our business, is we're reactive. Tones go off, boom, what do we got? PD drowning. Okay, look up your hands heavy, let's go. Someone has their worst day and we try and mitigate it. But that doesn't work in the health and wellness space. So as we have found ourselves, attracting fewer and fewer people, now we're not only having these health issues, but we're starting to see vacancies in departments. And from what I understand, a number that I'm hearing is a lot of departments are like 25% vacant. And obviously it depends on every single person, but that's kind of a figure I'm seeing a lot. So for every one of those spots, now you're filling with a firefighter who's already worked 56 hours a week. Now it's 80 hours that week, and you're paying them time and a half. So when you look downstream at where the money is, where the bodies are, if you do a financial analysis, and again, I'm not pretending I'm some money guru because I'm not, but in principles, and this is what Gainesville and Pasco and all these other ones have done, how much am I spending on overtime? There, for Pasco and Gainesville, that was pretty much That was the money that they used to justify it. Retention and recruitment. Marion County is almost 20,000 per recruit that they train, who a lot of them then walk out the back door. So if I'm losing 100 recruits over a year or two, that's $2 million that just walked out my back door. It's now an asset for someone else that I gave for free. So that's a few more million. Now, if you want to look deeper, workman's comp. All the diseases and injuries I just told you, they come at a cost. There's a dollar amount for every single one of them. So healthier, happier workforce means far fewer workman's comp claims. Now your premiums are coming down. I'm talking principles. I'm not a money guru, but that's just an economics that that we understand. Medical retirements, another payment. It's heartbreaking. Someone who was such great shape on day one of the fire academy that's now retiring out with hypertension or a back injury. And there's a money element to that too. You keep that person healthy and happy, they have a long retirement and they retire normally. They don't, it doesn't cost the department. Even worse, line of duty deaths, God forbid. There's a payment there. The healthier your workforce, the lower the chances of that. And then a big one that we kind of touched on earlier, the lawsuits. We pushed the wrong med. We intubated the esophagus. We were too rough with the angry, annoying dude, whatever it was. When we are calm and well rested, we're far more likely to do the right thing and then have the right attitude with that person. That's why we're professionals. Despite, trust me, I've seen, there's been people I've wanted to tie on the top of the rescue and take them to the hospital, but you can't do that. So, having that well-rested, well-trained workforce, the lawsuit side too. So now you're looking at all these different parts that will improve if people are healthier and happier and the workforce is full. So, and I'm saying that because now I have multiple departments that have said that's where they justified the money. Now, of course, up front, you're going to need whatever. It tends to be most departments actually report 2/3 of a shift, not a full shift, depending on how you staff. But Pasco, Palm Beach, they're taking 3 years to go to it. But the biggest thing is they said, but we are starting now. We'll get to that first, but we'll get to recruitment in a second. But all right, so another thing I hear, well, they're going to cut our pay. If I work 56 and now I'm 42, then I'm going to lose all that money. I always tell people, well, if you go to training and now on your 40-hour work week, do they cut your salary? No, they just adjust the hourly rate. So your salary is your salary. You're still worth that same amount per year to that organization. You're just working, a healthy work week, which, like I said, down the road is actually going to save money. And I would think, and it's early to say, but I would assume that when you start saving your county or city money, now you have the opportunity to then work towards, raises, extra staffing, gym equipment, psychologists that you hire full time, whatever it is. So now you're layering these wellness benefits through that saving too. But no, if anyone's telling you that you're going to lose money if you go to it, then you need to get a new union or whoever's telling you that, because none of the departments that went to it did that. All right, the big question. Well, we can't even get people now. Going back to testing in Anaheim against 1,000 people for 30 spots, that was the environment that I came in 21 years ago now. That was normal for the fire service. There were people that tested, I just lucked out, and I think because I've worked for Hialeah, I was a lateral, I guess it helped, but guys that I tested with in California, I've been trying 5-6 years to get hired as a firefighter. That was the level of demand, and they were good firefighters. So we were there up until 8 years ago. It's been a plummet recently. The reason why we can't recruit, though, and I've heard lots of people well, kids don't want to work these days. They're all going into tech. Well, firstly, most of the kids that are going to tech are not the ones that are going to be the right candidate for the fire service, if we're talking about full-on tech. Because if you're all in on computers, you're not going to want to be extricating bodies and folding hose. It is what it is. But what's actually happening is, I think I've got this on the next slide. Let me just show you. Yeah, I'll go to this. So the Wall Street Journal just published something a couple weeks ago. Gen Z is actually leaning into the trades more than any generation for a long time. And what's happening is they're Googling, is college any good? And they're like, well, you $50,000 worth of student debt, you get a piece of paper that doesn't guarantee you a job. And then there's welding and plumbing, where you do trade school and then there are people waiting to hire you. And so they're like, that kind of access to information. These kids value their mental health. because we're finally talking about it, and they're our children. They value their physical health. We've got CrossFit and mud runs and all kinds of stuff now. When I was young, it was orange bodybuilders, that was it. And then they value relationships. A lot of us work really hard to make sure we are present as parents, and these kids are being raised in that environment. But when they Google, let me put this up, when they go into AI like I did yesterday, is it healthy to be a firefighter? I won't read the whole thing, but you can see what it says. So the point is, when our young people are researching this profession, even though they want to serve, and it's an honorable profession, and it's not all doom and gloom, what we do is incredible. We are the Swiss Army knives of the first responders. If it doesn't involve arresting someone, we're it. You know, I've got people out of trees, cats out of trees, hung from ropes, gone down pipes. Whatever the issue is, we have to mitigate it. Cut people out of cars, you name it. So it's not the job, but if you look at the working conditions, like I said, that are important to these young people, 56 hours a week, well, that's a lot more than all the other jobs I looked at. Oh, but I haven't finished yet. If it gets to the next day and they're short-staffed, you have to stay for another 24 hours. That's 80 hours. They've got cancer, overdose, suicide, weight gain, divorces, trauma passed to the next generation. And when you factor those together with all the good stuff, and then I've literally been told of many, many people in the fire service, these kids come with like overviews of every different position and they're comparing it, you're going to go into welding. You just are. So we have an amazing opportunity with this generation that wants to go into the trades to actually find some incredible firefighter EMTs and paramedics, but we have to fix the things that are broken to attract them. They are out there. 30% of certified firefighters in the state of Florida aren't working as firefighters. So we have an untapped resource that we can bring in, but we have to fix the things that are broken. All right, now, working off duty, this is an interesting one. And you notice every single one of these, I'm not saying admin has to fix this, or it's all of us. Every single bullet point is both of us, the employee, the employer working together. So when I say, but early on, I've been talking about this for over 8 years, I would have people, usually chiefs, say, well, if we give them more time off, they're just going to work more. Well, firstly, that's not a very good response, because you're saying you're in charge of someone even on their days off. But let's look at it from a broader scale. If you create an environment that attracts recruits and now you're fully staffed, the overtime isn't there to do more firefighting. And that's a beautiful opportunity. You've got some people, we have one that we refer to as the overtime person of the night that likes to take all the overtime. But actually, if you climb inside that person's head, they probably are struggling mentally. Because if you deliberately don't go home, that's a massive red flag. But there is such a healthy element to working outside the fire service as well. Everyone in here, I'm sure, has a side hustle or something that they're passionate about or they've always wanted to do. If you now, for example, Jeremy, do locksmithing, yeah? Okay, so you're a locksmith, okay? So you do your 24/72, you're a locksmith on the side, but you do kind of daytime hours, and then you go to bed and you sleep next to your partner and you wake up and have breakfast with your kids. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, ownership on us. If you go and take an overnight ER shift, then you're an idiot because you just didn't sleep on purpose. So there has to be ownership of us if we're going to have more time off to maintain our sleep when we're off shift as well. But one of the biggest struggles that first responders have is when they transition out, a lot of them identify just as a firefighter. And now they find themselves out and they struggle with identity, with loss of tribe, loss of purpose. But if you've been building a locksmithing business, you've got that other tribe, you've got that other income. God forbid you get hurt, fired, or something else happen. And when your last day is your last day, whatever that looks like, you're still a locksmith. So we're going to lose overtime, or they're going to work more on a days off. You fully staff your department, the overtime goes down to the minimum again. And there's times when hurricanes come and other issues where, you kissed your loved one goodbye, I'm going to have to go to the station for a couple of days, there's a hurricane blowing in, and we're it. But outside of that, not using overtime as a staffing model, now you actually forge entrepreneurship and you have a healthy tribe for these first responders to have a second identity and a place to transition to. So working off sensibly is a very good idea. But educating the firefighter on the importance of sleep is an imperative thing too. Now, I mentioned the 48-96. The one takeaway that they found was that second day they were better rested. I worked for 14 years. This never even occurred to me, and someone mentioned it about a year ago. We do 24 hours. We start and finish on the exact same time. So we can turn that however we want. It doesn't change anything. So I've always got up at 5 in the morning, driven 70 miles to the station, and I realized recently, I was reflecting, I only spent one morning out of 3 for 14 years with my family. First day I was up at 5, everyone's asleep. Second day, by the time I get home, everyone's at school and work. The third day, I finally get to see my family in the morning. If we start at 11 a.m. or 12 noon, I wake up, have breakfast with my kids, kiss my wife goodbye, they go to school and work, then I've missed rush hour, I go to the station. The person who I'm going to relieve got absolutely murdered all night, finally got to the station at 6:30 in the morning. The old system, 7 o'clock, the tones are going to go off, I'm going to have to wake up and do shift change. Sorry. But now, because we are doing this 11 or 12, you get to sleep until 10. You're already checked out, you're ready to go on a call, nothing needs to be done. So now when he drives home, when I come in, he can drive home with a clear head instead of being a smear on I-4 like some of us do. And to underline that, I don't know if I mentioned this in this one, the cadre that runs Special Forces Selection, Green Berets, one of my friends, Alison Brager, is a military sleep medicine expert. They've lost numerous cadre members driving home after selection. They weren't being selected, they were running the course, and they drove off a mountain in North Carolina because they were so tired. So that's another part of the sleep deprivation. Zero cost, but considering why do we start at 8? It makes no sense. So that's something to think about as a second prong. 24/72 is absolutely the first thing, but we can layer it. The next one, and this is not a sales pitch, it's just this is the company that's doing it properly. AMR, the ambulance company, has the umbrella company GMR, Global Medical Response. They have a thing now called nurse navigation. I had their medical director and one of their medics on the show, and I was talking about 911 abuse, and he said, we don't call it abuse. I was like, all right, I'm all ears, go on. He said, we think of it as a 3-tier system. ALS, BLS, and non-emergent. So, you're a new parent, you've got an 18-month-old kid. They're slightly febrile, they threw up once, you're like, oh, my kid's going to explode and die of dehydration. So I'm going to call 911. So the dispatcher obviously does the algorithm, discovers that it's not a high acuity call, and they said, well, hey, we can get you on the line with a nurse. Would you want to speak to them? Parents like, well, yeah, that sounds great. I just want to know what to do. I've never had this happen before. The nurse walks them through. It might literally be treat at home. Well, hey, take the clothes off, leave the diaper on. Have you got any Tylenol, pediatric Tylenol? Okay, we're going to give them this. We're going to keep the covers off. If anything changes, you can call us back. They can also set up urgent care clinics, Uber rides to appointments, dentist, optometry, all kinds of things. And then there's also a telehealth feature. If you need to actually consult with a doctor, they can do that. So you've got the people that run out of their prescription at 2 in the morning. They do an online consult. They can even get the meds delivered to them. And the result is, firstly, and I saw this in Disney all the time when I worked for the Creek, they called the ambulances an alpha. So, you're a concerned parent when they say, oh, the Disney people, oh, we can call you an alpha. Okay, that sounds good. Is that a wolf? What are we getting? And we show up, monitors, stretchers, scary people. And luckily, we were able to do a lot of refusals, because you tell a kid, well, look, you're in a resort, in a comfortable bed, let's take the Tylenol, let's, strip down to the diaper, and just, let them sleep. Because if I take them to ORMC in Orlando, there's a good chance they're going to be between a psych patient and a drunk, and that kid isn't going to have a very good time. It's not going to be therapeutic for it. So by allowing this kind of telehealth element to kick in, that child stays in their own bed, the parents have peace of mind, they've got the backup of, like, if anything changes, call us back, and the medics will come and take you to hospital. But they get a $500 bill instead of a $3,000 ER bill. An ER bed stays open because, despite what the media told us during COVID, the hallways of hospitals are always full of us waiting with gurneys. So every open bed is an opportunity for a sick person to actually get treated. And then just as importantly, you guys don't get toned out for that call. So if you think about the number of non-acuity or low acuity calls that you respond to, those would all go away. So the health and wellness of the first responder, the wear and tear on the rigs, the diesel, all of those, the liability of us driving each time that we break the threshold, all those go away for those low acuity calls. So I think that's an amazing option as well. So you've got the 2472, you've got changing the start time, you've got removing some of the non-emergent calls that we should not be going to anyway. Now you've freed up time for training, time for a better response, and like I said, less wear and tear on machinery and gas as well, or diesel. So just that's more food for thought. All right. So when you look at it with the impact on the mental health, the impact on the physical health, the impact on relationships, because as I said to the first group, if I was going for a job in Bank of America and they said, oh, you wait, in 10 years you'll be on your third divorce and have an alcohol problem, I'd be like, I'm not working here, this sounds shit. But this is what we do. This is what we joke about. Ha ha ha, we've had 2 divorces. It's not funny. It's the way, this is what happens to us relationship. Now you've got estranged children. Now you're passing on trauma there. So these are all the impacts on our first responders. But then you look at the money side as well. Well, we are bleeding money in all these areas, and it would be so much more proactive and economic to put this, front load it, and then increase the delivery of service. Because like I said, if this line is coming down, how is that affecting our ability to serve? It's diminishing, there's no question. And that is then increasing the likelihood of us making a mistake and costing our city or county a lot of money. So really, to me, and this is again aimed at not one group, but every single tier of the ladder, it's having the moral courage to take a step back, question the way that we were all taught, and I get it, I was one of them, and think about that proactive, let's go upstream and see why they're falling in. How can we make the fire service perform at the highest level and also be the most fiscally responsible for our city or county? So to me, the courage to actually change, despite the way we've always done it, like I said, those chimney sweeps and factory kids, that will revolutionize things. And someone said to me the other day, and it was interesting. He said, our forefathers, the generation before me, came up with bunker gear and the SCBA and the extrication tools. The thing that our generation can do is change the working environment. Because imagine 10 years from now, recruits around a table laughing and go, did you hear they used to work 56 hours a week? And then they laugh and they go back to their phones. But this is what we can do. We can normalize a healthy work week. So we have the opportunity to be pioneers. And just to be very, very honest, as you can probably tell from the stats in the recruitment conversation, if you're an early adopter, you get to be a destination department. You get to pull the best firefighters from wherever they're coming from. If you're late to the party, now you're hoping that other good recruits are going to be going through fire academies. And they will, but there will be a lag. So this is an opportunity for progressive departments, and I would argue that St. John's is one of them because they put this together, to really kind of be ahead of the needle and actually, take the cream of the crop and forge an excellent, excellent fire service. I don't know why it didn't go. I'll try that again. There we go. All right. So that's me yapping for an hour. So I'm going to put it over to you guys now. I mean, I just hit the main questions that I know everyone is asking: recruitment, money, all that stuff. But there's a lot of other stuff out there. So